Hi, and welcome to Reality Check. I'm your host, Lou Meyer, and I'm fortunate this week to have my guest, Hank Meals. Hank, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
This is great. So, Hank has written quite a number of books about the Yuba Trails 1, Yuba Trails 2, and the river. And today we're mostly probably going to talk about the river, I would guess, since
Yes,
the latest
that's
book.
the only ones for sale.
Well, now, wait a minute. I found this Yuba Trails one at Booktown Books a couple weeks ago. So
Good.
they're available.
Oh, good.
Somebody's got them memorized, so they're willing to let them go to the bookstore. So, one of the things I found really interesting about the river, and in the beginning, and we can talk about this a little bit, but you don't just talk about the trails there are to hike on. You talk about a little bit of the Native American history up here, and that to me was really fascinating. The pine nut gathering groups. There's one, I think it was the Washoe tribe. There was actually a trail from all the way up at Squaw all the way down to Colfax. Mm-hmm. And they would come down, they'd live on the eastern slopes during the summer or warmer months, is that right? And then come over the hill, or did I have that backwards?
Not necessarily on the eastern side, but at higher elevation, higher upslope, because you have different plant communities to take advantage of.
And so they were really migratory, hunting, gathering?
To an extent, not so much. I mean, the acorn was the ability to process acorn. By that I mean taking the tannic acid out of an acorn, provided a really reliable and bountiful food. So they were very much tied to that. So during the spring and summer, you'd go out and follow the ripening of plants and the animals, so animal migrations, and then everybody would reassemble in the fall for the acorn harvest. But they wouldn't go too far. They were pretty provincial people in the Nisenan Maidu. And then with the acorn harvest, the other great thing about acorns is you could store them. So they were stored in granaries throughout the winter. And it got a little lean towards late winter, but there's always a new plant coming on, and there's hunting going on. But although most of the diet was plants. And
yeah, fishing and everything. But as a result of the gold rush, that changed everything up here.
Absolutely. In addition to the acorn, I would say the acorn is absolutely the fundamental food source for the foothill Indians in California. And right up there with it is salmon. You had 2 salmon runs, as well as 2 steelhead runs, and Pacific lamprey eel were in there too. But these were bountiful, I mean, for the entire ecosystem, the salmon run, because when all those salmon carcasses were stinking up the shoreline, mm-hmm. All those animals and birds were eating that, and in turn enriching the soil. It was just a huge jolt of protein for the entire ecosystem. Really recharged things.
It's pretty amazing. We went up to, I think I was near Emerald Bay last year during the salmon spawning, and it was amazing how many salmon were still out there. I'd never seen anything like that before, and it looked like I'm not sure who did it, but maybe the ranger, the Bureau of Land Management, had a gate up at the top of one of the streams to keep them from getting up any further than they were. So there were thousands of salmon just kind of floating around in little pond areas. Mm-hmm. Up there, and you don't see any of that down here at all anymore.
No. Well, as you know, this is it's turned into a nightmare. The entire fisheries situation for the salmon is in a great deal of trouble now.
Yeah, there's no fishing there again.
Yeah, right. It's and it's attributed to conditions in the ocean as well as conditions inland. So, I mean, it's a general degradation of habitat.
And it's a pretty scary thing.
It is.
The whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
Now, on a little bit lighter note, all the trails that you talk about in your books, were those originally made by the Native Americans, you think? Or
a few of them. Well, for instance, there are obvious places. Like one place you talked about was the ridge between the North Fork of the American and the South Yuba, where Highway 80 is today. Mm-hmm. Well, that's just an obvious ridge line that would make huge sense to follow for going up and down. The same with the ridge to Nevada City from out of that area, from Bear Valley. coming on down. So obvious ridge lines, and another place was along streams. I mean, it's impossible to get lost if you follow ridge lines and streams. But in terms of whether or not they were used by Native Americans, the only way you're going to be able to tell is if you find artifacts along the whole thing. And there are trails where I have found that. The Lavizola Trail up in on the North Yuba, and the Doolittle Trail on the South Yuba, which a lot of people have a hard time finding the trailhead of, but I found artifacts all along that thing. That gives you access from the South Yuba above Washington up to where Lake Bowman Road is now. So you're going up about 2,500 feet pretty fast on that trail. And that's an entirely different ecosystem.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you don't have to go very far to be in a completely different environment.
Mm-hmm. An awful lot of the trails that are out there now are from a historic era. Almost all of the main trails that are maintained by agencies, lately they've added on a few, but a lot of them, they've basically refurbished historic trails.
Who does the maintenance of the trails now?
Well, volunteers now, because there's not much of a budget for it.
That's why I'm asking. Yeah. It used to be the park rangers. We came here from Sonoma County, and I started seeing areas where you used to be able to just go. Everything was pristine. Parking was free, and then suddenly there were huge parking fees. No ranger, put your money in this little box, and they had canceled the budget for the rangers to maintain the area.
Yeah. When I first got here in the early 70s, I worked at a series of jobs, including trail construction and trail maintenance contracts. So it was a lot more important in those days.
Yeah. Well,
even though more people are using them now.
Well, yeah, it's a cheaper thing to be. That's cheap outdoor entertainment.
Yeah.
Well, how would you do create a trail? Would you go with heavy machinery, or did everybody do it by hand?
These days they have a small tractor that does it, but we cut trail with McLeods. You know what a McLeod is? It's like a broad hoe. It has a rake on one side. It's used in firefighting, cutting hand lines.
Oh, I think
it's also a wonderful hand tool for trails. But you start in with, loppers, pick, McLeod, shovel.
How many guys would go out and do this?
There'd usually be a group of 4 to 6 of us.
Man, that's going to take a while.
Yeah, well, you're putting in a trail. A lot of trails around here are on the average of, I would say, 3 to 6 miles long, most of them. For instance, from the ridge top down to the canyons, a 2,000-foot descent, and there are all kinds of trails from the ridge top down to the river, for instance, and they're about 2.5 to 3 miles long on the average.
How long would it take to do one of those trails?
Oh, I don't know. I forgot. Well, we do it as fast as possible.
Just keep working at it every day.
Yeah. You camp out, and you work 12-hour days. You want to make as much money as you can and get on to the next job.
Move on and do it.
Because it's seasonal work, and that's all there was. You're definitely off in the winter.
Speaking of the seasons and stuff, in the beginning of the book, another thing that I found that extremely important is where you discussed what kind of things you would take with you, even if you were just going on a day hike. And there was a lot more stuff on that list than I've taken with me. And in some cases, there are things in there that I wished I had, like more clothing, for instance, or like wool. You really stress the importance of having a wool hat and a scarf. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about those kinds of things and how you discovered what you might need?
Oh, some of this I discovered the hard way. It's an easy thing to bring a windbreaker. They weigh nothing, and it doesn't mean much when you're hanging out in town on Broad Street. But when you're up on a ridgetop and the wind's blowing your body heat away from you, your temperature's dropping. If you get wet or even that is sustained, you run the risk of hypothermia. You won't even know hypothermia is coming on because it affects your judgment in the process of coming on. So one of the things that happened to me, one time I was out hiking up near Gold Lake. I was hiking by myself. It started to rain. It was towards the end of a 3-day hike by myself. And as I was coming down slope, I had a couple miles to go. It started to rain. It was more like a sleet But I got thoroughly soaked to the point, once you start shivering, it's no small thing. Everything I had was wet. Fortunately, there were some A-frames down at the bottom. It was in the fall, and I was able to break into one of them, and I wanted to lie down and go to sleep. This is classic. That's the first thing you want to do. You just want to lie down and go to sleep.
And that's the absolutely wrong thing to do.
It's over if you do that.
Man.
That when they talk about dying of exposure, that's what they're talking about. But there's a little voice in me saying, you better get out of these clothes. And I'd say, well, I'll take a little nap first. But eventually, I did get out of my clothes. I got into my sleeping bag, made a pull-a guard, something that worked even if it was wet. That saved my life. I mean, if I had gone to sleep then, when I worked for the Forest Service, every couple of years, somebody would die from hypothermia.
Man, and you're out of it, so you don't know that you have it.
You think you're still making good decisions, but and you just get tired. You want to rest.
That sounds like me in my 20s, thinking I was making good decisions, but
yeah. So just carrying a couple of layers of this and that. Another thing is, in recent years, it's become pretty obvious that cotton's not a great material to wear if you're going to be sweating and the temperature is going to change, because it absorbs absorbs moisture. Mm-hmm. And it
keeps you cold.
Yeah, it keeps you cold. So there are all kinds of wicking type undershirts that are really a worthwhile investment. So you're not going to have something cold and clammy against your body.
And then over those, you would wear a variety of layers?
Yeah, layers. It's just, there's so many, especially now. This year I found in a thrift shop an LL Bean pullover that weighs absolutely nothing, and it's amazingly warm. Wow. I feel like I found the Holy Grail. I mean, it's a phenomenal garment because it's adding absolutely no weight to my pack, and it provides all this warmth.
Do you have like certain kinds of food that you would recommend people to carry with them if they're out there? Keep their body warmth up or anything like that?
The food thing is largely intuitive. People tend to bring cheeses and nuts and high-powered things, but I don't have any particular advice on that. My wife makes terrific lunches, and that's the way it goes. I'm
usually a trail mix kind of guy.
Yeah.
A bag of raisins and nuts and chocolates and stuff, yeah. and fruit.
I will say that in terms of garments to have it out there, you absolutely need a hat. You absolutely need a hat in all seasons, because I find as I'm growing older, the sun in the summer gets more oppressive every year. It starts really beating down on you, whereas as a young man in my 20s, I couldn't get enough sunshine.
Yeah,
but it's a little different now. And we're more aware of the detrimental effects of ultraviolet rays, and et cetera.
Well, that's it. But I like you say that in your book. You bring a hat that will shade your neck during the sun, but you also want to bring a warm hat, a wool mm-hmm. hat or something for when it cools down.
It makes a serious difference. You lose so much heat out of the top of your head. And the scarf, just try it sometime. Go out in the fall. Weighs next to nothing. You can find a nice wool scarf in a thrift shop.
Sure.
And really makes a difference. Really makes a difference.
I've gone out fly fishing with my son and one of the other dads and one of my son's friends, and we would be up on the little truckee or something, and it'd be really hot and sunny during the day, and then you'd try and catch the evening fishing, and it would cool way down. If you didn't have extra stuff, you wouldn't be spending too much time out there.
Well, we saw right here at this elevation about 2,000 feet, and the last few days we've seen 40-degree range in weather, in temperature.
Well, this morning I got up, it was 39 degrees, and a couple of days ago we were moving some dirt in my yard, and it was in the 90s. I picked the hottest day of the spring to do the wrong job.
Well, you get to the high elevations, you get all of the above, plus wind, possibly rain. So.
Let's talk a bit about hiking in the high elevations, because it's way different. The air's a bit thinner. What's the highest we can get up here now?
Well, the highest point in the South Yuba watershed is Mount Lola. It's a little over 9,000 feet.
That's substantially high.
And Castle Peaks is over 9,000. Basin Peak's up there. That's pretty high.
There's a nice hike from the rest area where you can go across under the freeway and then go up to Castle Peaks. And, looking at it on the map, I forget how long it took my buddy and myself to do it, but we thought we would be doing a lot faster than we did. And by the time you get to the top, you were like plodding along and trying to catch air.
The map's flat. It's easier to traverse.
Right, we didn't have a working model. But yeah, I got up there, and I looked across to where there's a place where you can kind of climb up the peak. So you almost have to have gear to do it. Mm-hmm. And a couple of kids were up there. I thought, man, I've done enough just getting where I am here.
Yeah, don't do foolish things when you get out there because you're in a remote spot. I mean, that last little macho effort to get up to stand on some pinnacle when it's another 10-foot gain is really not worth it.
I know, you don't really need to have that photo.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Well, you spoke earlier about being on a 3-day hike on your own, and in your book you don't recommend doing that.
I don't. I made a lot of mistakes, and that's why I told that story in the book.
It's important. I mean, a lot of times I'll just go, I feel like getting away from people. I think I'll just go take a hike. And you have to be careful about it.
Yeah. Well, I think the most typical injury you could probably get out there is as simple as twisting an ankle, skidding on some rocks, or wedging your foot in something. Anyway, it would have to do with twisting or turning your foot or ankle. And that would seriously put you at a serious disadvantage.
If you're by yourself,
that happened.
there you are.
Mm-hmm.
What do you, so again, then in that case, you would recommend that people not just go wandering out there in, sandals or
no, I don't think that's a good idea. Some shoes that give you some ankle support, some shoes that have some kind of lugs underneath, those will be all-purpose and serve you through any kind of terrain in this watershed.
You got to have ankle support in there. It's got to come up above the ankle.
Yeah, for more than one reason. A lot of people like to wear low shoes, but in addition to support, you're banging your ankles against rocks all the time, especially if you take some of these overland routes and you get up at the higher elevation sites and there's more rock than anything.
It sure is. That Castle Peak is a good example. Mm-hmm. What do you think about, it's something that if somebody were going to go on a day hike with a couple of their friends, what kind of stuff might you want to carry? Is that too simple of a question?
A great lunch.
Yeah, great.
Enough water. And it's wise to invest in some water filtration system. They're pretty inexpensive, but
they have some good ones now.
Yeah, they get better all the time. And that's definitely worth having because you're going to drink a lot of water. If you hike in these canyons, say like the South Yuba Canyon in the summer, it is really hot. And, even though it's billed as being alongside the river, sometimes you'll be quite a distance upslope and you won't be able to get to the river. So it's good to have enough water.
If you're going for a really long hike, you may not even be able to carry enough water. So having these filtration systems is important. And now I remember reading in the book that there's also Giardia in the water.
Right.
Can you tell folks what that is?
Giardia is a microbe that comes from cattle, basically, cattle crap. Although you could get it from beaver or mostly cattle because of the concentration of them and the fact that they hang out near streams.
So it just goes right into the river.
Yeah, and it may take a while before you even feel the symptoms, which could be cramping, diarrhea, etc.
Is this a permanent condition?
I don't think so. I've never.
It would be wise to think before you go drinking water right out of the river. You might want to have one of these machines.
I don't think Giardia per se is so much of a problem on the river. Because it's so far from any grazing land. I mean, although the same water came down from up above, but it's diluted so much more in the river. But there are other things. I mean, I'm just mistrustful of late in the summer when the water's slowed down and it's a little too emerald green for me. And,
yeah, sure.
And the moss is 1.5 inches.
That'd be a good indicator. You might want to filter that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, man, yeah. So in your book, you've talked about there are a whole bunch of different trails, and a lot of them are within real short distance. Well, we're living in the middle of the foothills, so a lot of close-in places. What are a couple of your favorite ones in the area here, without giving away secrets or anything?
Well, you know, that's one of the things I had to do. When we worked on the first book, people said, "You mean you're going to tell people where these places are?" And then there are going to be all those people there. But what I found out when I worked for the Forest Service is when you sit at the table and you're discussing land use of a particular area, you have the timber representative there who has his perspective. You have the wildlife biologist trying to maintain a little bit of habitat. And you have other interests. But you've got to have a seat at the table for this trail. If somebody says nobody ever uses that trail, then it's not considered.
Wow.
But people using those trails, if you see that coming up, that there's a timber sale and it's going to impact the Doolittle Trail, say, you'll say, "Hey, I've been on that trail. I think I'll write a letter, or I want to get involved in this." So I found that it was better to give the trail a constituency, get over that idea of secrecy in trails. One of the great things we have in the Yuba watershed, South Yuba watershed, is the Grouse Ridge area, which is a roadless area.
That's beautiful.
There are very few roadless areas around here. There are roads everywhere. And part of that is because of when they put in the railroad, they gave away every other section as a right-of-way to sweeten the deal. So that's created a checkerboard of very difficult way to manage land based entirely on legal land lines. So within a valley, you may have 3 or 4 ownerships, and you can't look at it as a valley per se.
You have to look at all the individual interests.
Yeah, so it's kind of difficult. Where did we start out? I kind of lost track of.
I was just asking you what might be a couple of your favorite trails.
Yeah, and I went into Grouse Ridge. But the wonderful thing about Grouse Ridge is it's one of the few places, despite how close it is to 80, you can't hear 80.
I know, I love that.
And I would like to also commend the users of that area, because by and large, given the amount of people who use that, it's incredibly clean. It's kept very clean. And that's the individual efforts of people who use it. And that's good citizenship.
People are way more conscious of the environment and not impacting it. You know, I had Joseph Cornell on a few weeks ago, and one of his, he does sharing nature with children, and he takes kids on trail hikes and helps them to recognize some of the flora and fauna, and he points out herbs and this. But one of the little exercises is he'll put man-made stuff periodically along the trail. And so that particular exercise, the kids are supposed to spot something that's not natural and make a note of it. And a lot of times they'll find, tires and beer cans or cigarette butts or anything like that, and then the stuff that he's placed there. But while they're looking for the things he's put there, they're finding all this other, detritus that shouldn't be there in the first place. It seems to me that the further I get away from civilization, even if they're well-worn trails, the less of that stuff I'll see, if any at all.
Well, at the risk of sounding a little prejudicial, I think you got a better quality person out there hiking than you do at the drive-to campgrounds,
I would say.
By and large, where there's a lot of mess.
That's pretty amazing. We only got a few minutes left. I want to touch on, you want to talk a little bit about the watershed? Water is the most important thing. Well, the Yuba watershed, it's the South Yuba watershed. It's about the river itself from Point Defiance down near Bridgeport, where it flows into the main trunk of the river, to the summit. It's about 60 miles long. And the catchment, a watershed, what a watershed is essentially a catchment defined by ridge tops, so that all the precipitation from snowmelt to rain will wind up in the South Yuba River and that particular watershed. So keep it healthy.
Yeah, definitely. I forget where I was going.
Oh, well, that's all right. You know,
Oh, yeah, we've got about 352 miles, I believe, square miles in that watershed. And that contributes about 17% of the total volume of water in the Yuba system, including all three forks.
you know, what about all these, you know, we talked about global warming a few times on the show. What about the effect of the snow melt? That's extremely important for the entire year, and now there isn't any snow melt this year, right?
I think this year is not too bad, but we're dependent on snow melt. That's definitely part of the ecosystem here. It's essential. It charges the groundwater. When it slowly melts, it just charges all the groundwater.
Yeah,
It's
everybody
ideal.
who's on a well should be concerned about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, we're running down to a couple of minutes. I would like to show here. This one's is this out of print now?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's one you're going to have to hunt for. It's called Yuba Trails, and this is the second one. The first one.
That's the first one.
This is the first one.
Yeah.
Okay, there's one that's a spiral-bound one that you're really going to have to hunt for because everybody hangs on to them. And this is Hank's latest book, The River. The first 10 or 12 pages is all about the Maidu and the Washoe Indians. They're a fabulous read right there. And then inside we have, let's see, I'm missing my page. Maps. Can we see this? Zoom in. Oops. Let's try that. Topo maps, descriptions, photos of the river. Whoops, darn, I can't get this backwards. I want to flip it to the left. I'm supposed to go to the right. And all the different campgrounds, how difficult the hikes are, what you might want to consider to bring with you, and all that kind of good stuff that we were just discussing. And is there anything else? We got 1 minute left. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the folks?
Well, I would like to say that Support Circle, who's been wonderful in terms of being good stewards of a river system that was mighty abused during the mining period, particularly hydraulic mining. So we are indeed fortunate, and I suggest you all pitch in at some level on this effort.
Yeah, and participate in the cleanup.
Yeah.
It's an amazing
Well,
thing.
better yet, don't make a mess.
Don't make a mess. Hey, thanks again for coming on, Hank.
You're
This
welcome.
is wonderful. I'd love to have you come on again. We'll talk a little bit more
Okay.
about hiking the trails. Thanks for watching Reality Check. Thanks to my crew, Gail, Richard, Scott, Joe, Terry, and Tricia, and Alicia. And if you or anybody else would be a good guest for Reality Check, you can email me at loumeyer@nccn.net, and we'll see if we can have you on. And thanks for watching the show. And be clean out there on the rivers and the trails. Thanks for watching.
How do you make a TV show?
I've never seen that on TV before.
Where can I show my movie?
Isn't that, what's her name?
I could do that.
That would be a great show. This is my town.
I was there. Watch this.
Wow, what is this?
How'd he get on TV?
My neighbors should know.
We've got to get the word out.
So that's what that construction is about.
I'm glad I know that now.
What channel is this?
How can I reach my community?
Cool. When's that happening?
I work with that girl.
I know that guy. Where can I show my movie?
I'd like to make TV.